Thank you very much. I decided to have Morgan because I feel like when I met Morgan, he's a genuine human being that really cares for this country. I think anyone who's standing up against, certain policies with climate change and the farmers and policies that are going to really cripple the Australian businesses is pretty amazing. I think we're up against some pretty hard times, and us being Australian citizens, we need to look after Australian business. He's a very genuine human being and he needs all the support he can. He's representing the whole of Victoria. So everyone in this room, this is a great opportunity for us to sort of educate Australians what's actually going on and how we can sort of push back on policies that aren't coming from Australia, they're coming internationally. And we have to wake up people that these things are coming through fast and furious, and if people haven't started to see what's going on with our farmers and our water and our food and GMO and all these types of things that we honour this country for, I think people really need to understand we're not some conspiracy group that everyone talks about. We're concerned Aussies, and here's our man to tell us all about his amazing policies, and I want us all to get behind him if we can and have the time in the next coming months. Thank you, Mr. Morgan.
Thanks. First of all, a big thank you to Lorraine and Jess and also My Place Bayside for having me, and a big thank you to each and every one of you for coming out tonight. You could be doing anything else, but you've chosen to be here tonight, so I certainly appreciate that very much. And Jess has touched on some very critical points. I think we're all here because we're like-minded and we know there's major issues facing our country that we have been facing for a long time. And farming is definitely a topic close to my heart. Not that I come from a farming background, I do come from the country originally. Here's just a little stat for you that you may or may not be aware of, and that is that between 2010 and 2020, Victoria lost 10,000 small to medium-sized farms. 10,000 farms. Think about the magnitude of that loss. What happened after those farms were lost? They were purchased by foreign interests, sometimes from China, sometimes from other countries, thanks to our government's succession of free trade agreements that often have placed foreign interest in front of Australian interests, granting unfettered access to our markets whilst limiting our capability to invest in foreign nations. Mining corporations just swooping in, buying up land, holding those farms that became distressed, that were forced to sell so that we can, allocate our tax money to wind farms and what have you. And one of the major driving factors behind the loss of those farms between 2010 and 2020, and I'd hate to think how many more farms we've lost since then, was really due to in many instances, the commoditisation of water. Changes in our federal legislation that many of us here would probably argue were unconstitutional, that effectively allowed our water to be traded in a similar fashion to stocks on the stock market. Politicians acquiring stocks in water undisclosed, buying in the rainy season, waiting till a drought, and then seeking to sell those stocks back to farmers at rates sometimes 1,000 times higher than what they originally purchased those bonds for. Now, I think that we probably all agree that nobody in this country voted for a policy like that. Nobody in their right mind who respects this land, who respects those who feed us, our farmers, would ever support such a destructive policy. And so the question is, I guess, how did we get here? Why did this happen? How have we been so badly taken advantage of in our good faith, right? Election in, election out, voting for representatives that we hope will do a good job, only so in the end we're completely undermined. The cost of living is through the roof. Australian policy is cooked up in these multilateral organisations overseas and rubber stamped by state, territory and federal governments. And the simple answer to that question is elections have consequences. So voting matters. And that's why I'm here today. And I've been speaking this phrase a fair bit lately, along with Courtney. we hosted an event last Sunday where we spoke about the radical hypersexualized programs in Victorian schools and the extreme gender ideology being taught to our children. And it's really shocking to see where we ended up. And furthermore to that point, I'm here speaking about politics because I believe there are political solutions. I know that not everybody shares those sentiments, and some people hold the perspective that this country's so far gone, that there's no such thing as a political solution, and that Australians should just simply relocate to faraway places and start their own communities. And whilst that may be a viable option for some people, it's certainly not for everyone. And it's certainly not an option for someone like me who, well, I love Melbourne, this is my home, and I'm not willing under any circumstances to allow a government, or more specifically a treacherous government, to drive me out of my home into a place where I don't particularly want to live. Does that make sense? Okay, so how did we get here? Well, we got here because our politicians have let us down. We've been good-natured, we've been good working people. Most of us here are working class, just year in, year out, doing our taxes, paying our tax returns, voting for the red and blue team for a long time, and now we've reached a point where things have to change. So, voting matters and elections have consequences. This is, I think, really well illustrated in the United States. So when we look at America, we see obviously at the moment a democratic government with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris leading the US race, and Donald Trump, of course, rising up, vying for that second term of presidency. And some people out there will say, well, Democrat, Republican, what's the difference? Everybody gets screwed in the end. Well, in my talk last Sunday, I displayed a visual, which I wish I had here today, but I don't, so I'll just have to explain it to you, showing the differences in policy from Democratic states to Republican states in regards to gender therapy drugs, more specifically in a legal capacity to be prescribed to underage people. And what we saw in the visualization was that in every Republican state, minus maybe one or two, the prescription of such hormone therapy drugs to underage people had been outlawed. Completely illegal due to the health risks and the very real consequences young people face when altering their hormones at such a young age. Whereas when looking at the Democratic states, no restrictions whatsoever. State governments simply green-lighting the mass consumption of these highly damaging drugs with no regard for the impacts on young human life. So that to me is really all the proof that anyone needs to know that yes, voting matters, yes, elections have consequences, and when we come together and we educate ourselves on the issues and take it upon ourselves to find out who's genuinely fighting for the country, who's really interested in fighting for the children, things can change around. And I have some slides to illustrate some emerging changes around the world, changes that have already happened. Okay, so the main point of why I'm speaking today is I want to give a lot of hope. I believe that we can change Australia around. I'm personally I feel extremely betrayed by our government. This is not the country that I grew up in. I come from Emerald, and growing up, almost every item in our household, including our vehicles, were made in Australia. Now we don't make anything in this country. Okay, in the past, it was very normal for there to be just the father working, supporting the family, and now that's almost impossible for most people. And if I didn't believe that we could change this country around, I wouldn't be here. I run a business. I run a grounds and tree services commercial business, and after this evening, I've been called out to an emergency job, so I'm going to get in my car, in my ute, drive an hour north up to Rosanna, meet my crew, and we've got an emergency job, and we'll probably be done by like 2:30 a.m. And so, the only reason I'm telling you this is not to feel sorry for me. Like I love working. It's that I believe that we can make Australia a really incredible, great country. We just have to have faith, believe it, and to just pass that message on. And most importantly, support people who are vying for office who hold the values of a patriot. So, someone who seeks leadership to serve. That's the position, a servant. And it's spoken about in the Bible to serve, and it should be an honourable position. But we know that most politicians in our government, they serve who? They serve themselves. They remain quiet when they should speak. They vote on bills that they know are morally corrupt, because failure to do so would mean getting kicked out of their party, losing their pre-selection, and losing a $250,000 job that nobody in the private sector would pay them that type of money in their right mind. Okay, so I want to give you some hope and show you some progress from around the world. And when I speak about progress, I speak about certain politicians and parties that hold policies and values that I believe every single person in this room would value and appreciate. The value of patriotism and loving your country, preserving your language, your borders, your culture, the capability to self-govern without undue influence from the United Nations and the World Economic Forum, protecting the sanctity of life, protecting our children, fighting against the woke mind virus in all of its forms, getting back to basics, and respecting humanity for what it's supposed to be. Or, as I refer to it in my party, just the Freedom Party, putting Australians first. So I'm going to give you the first example of some progress. If we could go to the first slide, please. Alrighty, so Nigel Farage from, is this turned on? Yeah, we're good. From Reform UK, an absolute trailblazer. He was the architect of Brexit. Okay, so Brexit was all about an anti-globalist push to reinstate sovereignty back to the UK, to take control of their policy making, to take control of their migration programs, and to take back control of British jobs, British manufacturing, not subject to the laws and regulations of the European Union. He led a tremendous campaign, and he got UK over the line, and has been fighting for that Britain first, pro-Britain style of politics ever since. So in their last election, that was this year, we saw a vote of 14.3%, okay, which is actually quite impressive given the rusted-on nature of British voters voting for their two major parties there. Now, what you see is not the greatest result in the House of Commons, okay, with 5 out of 650 seats. So you may be thinking, well, that's not very good. How does that work? The reason for this, and there's a strategy behind it, so what doesn't look so great on paper is actually a major step in the right direction. And that's because Britain has what's called a first-past-the-post voting system, kind of similar to the United States. So here in Australia, we have a bit more flexibility for minor parties because we have a preferential voting system. So people such as myself who run a small party, I can make deals with like-minded other parties to combine our vote for a collective result at the when all the cards fall and the votes are counted. That doesn't exist in the UK, but Nigel Farage, instead of joining with the establishment Conservatives, who many would argue are just as much of a problem as the left over in the UK, and I would argue that somebody dressed up as a friend who actually acts in your worst interest is worse than an enemy who is honest about who they are. No, exactly right. Nigel said, well, it's going to be a long road to repairing the UK and all the damage done, so he's pushing forward with Reform UK. By doing so, he massively split the Conservative vote, and as a result of this splitting, we saw one of the biggest Labour victories for as far back as we can remember in the UK. But this is the beginning of a much bigger movement. So the 14.3%, I have no doubt that it will double in the next election, and it's going to take a few election cycles, but the truth is the Labour-light style of governance by the Conservatives is just not going to get UK back to a reasonable position for genuinely serving members of the public. So this to me is very exciting. Nigel hosting a whole range of policies that we all love and cherish, including but not limited to self-governance, self-determination and freedom. step in the right direction. And as you can see by the arrow, Reform UK definitely sitting on the centre right-hand side of politics, that's where I sit as well. If we could go to the next slide.
He's doing well in local government as well.
Yeah, he is, and I think he's got maybe 30 seats or something like that in local government. I'm getting a bit more excited about the Netherlands, what's been going on over there, seeing a huge rise in what we could refer to as centre-right populism over there in the Netherlands. The Party for Freedom winning the biggest primary vote in the past general election. So Party for Freedom standing for exactly the same types of principles that we're all supporting here: pro-farming, pro-country, anti-globalists. Okay, so we see the party leader there, Geert Wilders, achieving 23.49% of the vote, and a more, representative voting system, as we can see, 37 out of 150 seats in Parliament. Okay, so over in the Netherlands, it's a little bit of a different situation, because the other controlling parties, even some of them claiming to be centre-right conservative by nature, not wanting to form a coalition with Geert. So in a normal scenario, he should be the Prime Minister, but he's not. Okay, but by providing these critical numbers in Parliament, Geert has been instrumental in drastically changing national policy in the Netherlands. Okay, we've seen some huge changes to migration policy, to economic policy, and Netherlands, which has been suffering under, anti-human policy for a long time, particularly in regards to their farming and their supply chains and migration, is really starting to turn around rapidly. So you can only expect the brand of politics of Geert Wilders to become more and more popular in the Netherlands, and that brand is spreading around the world. Okay, it's not the establishment conservative politics that pretends to stand up for freedom of speech and free expression and then sells you out to foreign interests. This is a newer brand of centre right-wing politics that puts the country first, and foreign interests take a seat way to the back. Next slide, please. Alrighty, even a higher primary vote in the election just passed from Austria. I actually had some people messaging me, not realising the election was held in Austria, thinking it was Australia, and saying, "Morgan, congratulations! You've been working hard." And I said, well, that would be nice, but we've still got a lot more work to go. So as you can see, an outstanding result there by the Freedom Party of Austria, achieving 29.21% of the vote, forming coalition with other centre-right-wing parties, making government 58 seats out of 183. So this has all come about really in the past couple of years. A big response to COVID-19, a big response to European Union migration policies, a big response to policies from the United Nations and the World Economic Forum encroaching on people's freedoms. And as you can see, the people of the country have spoken up and said, no, hold on a second, we actually want policies that serve us. Next slide, please. All right. Javier Milei, have we heard of this guy? Incredible. So I guess you could describe him as a centre-right libertarian, a man who was on a complete mission, a mission to defund the needless, unnecessary, wasteful and selfish government spending. And that's exactly what he's been doing. Since taking office, he's been closing down one useless government department after another, sacking the Commissioner for Gender Equalities and critical race studies, and all of these, sort of neo-Marxist agendas that have been rolled out, the misappropriation of our funds, funding government departments and programs that quite simply take from us instead of building our country up. Javier he's taken his chainsaw and he's gotten to work. So in their presidential election, a clean, decisive victory there for the presidential vote, 55.65%. So clearly tapping into the hearts and minds of the people of Argentina, many of whom are living in poverty and are doing so as a direct result of the consequences of elections, but are now set for a much brighter future and a brighter future for their children, thanks to Javier Milei, who is now out there literally returning taxpayer dollars into the pockets of those who actually worked for that money in the first place. And what they've done in Argentina is something that I'm really inspired by, and something that I would love to see replicated here in Australia. So anyone from the minor centre-right party space or libertarian space, this applies to you. So Javier Milei, dealing with other leaders from other libertarian / centre-right parties, realised that there was no point for everyone to fight against each other and to potentially end up in a situation that would be politically disadvantageous. So they set up a formalised coalition to combine their vote, to join forces. You like that, Wanzia? Yeah. And so you've got different leaders from different centre, right-wing and libertarian parties cooperating in unison. So even though Javier Milei is from the Libertarian Party, when it came to the primary votes for a party he represented, LLA was actually a coalition of several parties who decided to put down their swords and work together, achieving a pretty good result of 26.51%, with 35 out of 257 seats in Parliament. So still some work to go, but having a very different system in Argentina. The office of the president holds executive power to execute executive orders, and so a very different style of government where the president can shut down entire departments or defund certain wasteful government projects, and the man's on an absolute tear and he's fearless, and there's nothing's going to stop him. I mean, look at him, he's got the leather jacket, he pulls chainsaws out at protests. I love the guy, and I think everyone should be very inspired by what he's doing. Next slide, please. All right. So this is my favourite story. This is my favourite story out of absolutely everyone. This young gentleman who's now just in his early 40s, Mr. Nayib Bukele, he was from a major party, okay, identified big problems in El Salvador. Of course, El Salvador, not all that long ago, was the homicide capital of the world, okay, with the highest rates of murder, extremely high rates of drug trafficking and human trafficking and organ harvesting and child abduction and child organ harvesting. And this young man looked at the two major parties and he said, you know what, they're both completely full of BS. They argue like cats and dogs. It comes to election time, the left wins, the right wins, and then the people of El Salvador continue to suffer year in, year out. He recognised the problems when it came to those stepping out of party lines. They would lose their pre-selection, they would lose their seat in Parliament, but he did something courageous. He resigned from one of those major parties, started his own party in 2017 and called the party New Ideas, and in 2019 he was elected as president. How incredible is that? Furthermore to that point, he tapped into the hearts and minds of the people of El Salvador. His party achieved 84.65% of the vote and controls 54 out of 60 seats. Okay? This all happened within a matter of years because the right man had the vision, but more importantly, the people of the country got behind him. They believed him, and he's a religious man and he believes in God. And he's humble and he credits what is happening to God, not to himself being some kind of extra special human being. And since attaining the office of president, he never imposed any vaccine mandates, any travel restrictions. People could visit El Salvador without showing a vaccine pass. He is making very smart economic decisions, attracting foreign investment, boosting industry, promoting freedom, and he has been on one of the strongest anti-cartel campaigns that we've ever seen, ever in Central America. So we're talking about MS-13, the worst types of drug dealers and murderers and those who engage in human trafficking. He's introduced a zero tolerance program, and El Salvador is rapidly becoming a safe country. The homicide rate is rapidly declining, and I'd recommend to anyone, if you are ever in a position to visit Central America, go to El Salvador. It's a beautiful country, and you've got leadership who, you've got God-fearing leadership who are genuinely there to build the country up. And had you have asked the people of El Salvador 5 years ago, do you think things will ever be different in this country? Do you think the cartels will ever stop? Do you think human trafficking will stop? Do you think government corruption will ever be fought against? 100% of people would have said, no, this is how it's always been, and this is how it will be forever. But it took one man with a great idea and a great vision, and the country got behind him. So I'm just using this point to illustrate that obviously Australia is nowhere near El Salvador in terms of the quality of life, but things can absolutely change. And I'd like to think that we don't have to hit that level before we can smarten up and actually kick the selfish politicians out of office. And, you know, we have to do something. So can we go to the next? All right, that brings us to President Trump. So we obviously have an election on in the United States right now. When Donald Trump was president, taxes were down. America was becoming an energy independent country. Trade deals were signed that were undoing various free trade deals from the past that had undermined and destroyed American manufacturing. People were gaining hope again. And of course, Trump went on to lose that election, or, you know, losing was the official result, okay, to Joe Biden. And we've seen the country progressively move backwards. But furthermore, as I mentioned before, in regards to the example of Democratic states versus Republican states, and Republican states actually taking measures to protect children, I think this election is very critical. What happens in the United States most definitely influences what goes on around the world. So there's not all that much we can do from Australia, but personally I'm really hoping that Trump and his team pull off the victory, because it was actually Donald Trump's speeches back in 2015 that motivated me to get into politics. So I thought, who is this guy, and this business guy with conducting these massive rallies? And for me, it was listening to Donald Trump speak about trade agreements and America getting screwed over by other countries and having weak leadership. And I thought to myself, that kind of sounds like Australia. So I went down a big rabbit hole and I read every trade agreement our government signed, and I came to a conclusion that we're actually in a worse position. And so that's what motivated me to get into politics back in 2015. Next slide, please. And so there you go. That's our party. That's the party of which, thank you very much. Yeah, so this was my vision, and very proud to be the founder of Freedom Party and also the president. We had a great election turnout in 2022 with over 100,000 people voting for our party, and pretty new to politics, but I think after a few years I've definitely learnt the ropes, and it's been a big learning curve, but I think new thinking and new strategy is definitely what we need in this country. The Labor Liberal paradigm is simply not working, just like it's not working over in the UK. We need the Geert Wilders style of politics, the Trump style of politics, the Nigel Farage, the Javier Milei, people first, freedom, and I'm very happy because I'm in a position now where I've been communicating with the leaders from other centre-right parties and libertarian parties so that we can all coordinate to the absolute best of our abilities to make these unofficial coalitions in order to capture it as a most high percentage of the primary vote moving into the next elections. Okay, and it's actually going to be a lot easier to do so this time round as opposed to last time, and that's because several similar parties have failed their compliance and are no longer in the race, which is obviously sucks for them, but logistically it's a lot easier, right? Because there's just less chefs in the kitchen, and so basically what I'm saying is that we're in such an incredible position. In 2022, 550,000 Victorians voted for either a centre right wing or Libertarian Party in the upper house. That equals 15% of the vote. So we're right on track with the UK. We're not far behind the Netherlands. And what this requires is really just coordination. And I have a seat at the table, and I'm here because I want to fight for this country and to fight for Victoria. And I was born here, and I could pack up and move to a place like Texas or Florida that has laws that I really like, where I could defend myself in my home, and if an intruder comes, you can shoot an intruder, which is, I think, just a normal right for self-defense and to protect your family. But I'm not moving there. I'm staying here because I believe in the potential of this country. I love this country, and I want as many people as possible to recognise where we can be. We're the most resource-rich nation on earth. We just have a government that has abrogated their duty of care, that are incapable of seeing beyond the next election or their next pre-selection, and they don't have a 20 or 50-year vision, and that's what we need if we're really going to leave our country in a better place for our children. So I just come with a message of hope, and I just would like you all to support this cause and to have faith that elections can actually change the course of history for a country. Thank you. We'll do some Q&A. I have to leave at 8:30 because I've got a site I have to open up in Rosanna. So after this, I'm driving an hour to meet my crew, and we've got to go and do this emergency job. 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Okay, no worries. So yeah, if anyone wants to ask, yeah, one's here.
What are the chances of all these freedom-based parties joining now? You're talking to them behind the scenes. What are the chances?
Well, I'm a willing participant to sit down and have those discussions. I can't speak so much on behalf of other people, but to anyone in the minor political party space, know that Morgan Jonas from the Freedom Party is waiting to sit down and talk to you. I'm willing to sit down and talk right now.
And they're not willing to talk to you?
No, they are absolutely willing to talk. So, yeah, it takes time. It takes time, but as long as it happens before the next election. Yes, sir.
Our next elections are local council. How can local council go forward with the policies that you're talking about? Is it happening at local level?
Yeah, absolutely, and we have a local council candidate right here. Thank you. Put your hands together for Wanzia. Yeah, absolutely. There's a good resource you can look up. It's called Fair Dinkum Candidates. So it's basically a directory that has been put together listing candidates who hold the values of freedom. I use the term of freedom quite loosely, but what we're looking for from our council candidates are to simply act in measures that promote the standard of living for members of the community, leaving the politics out of it. I think we can all agree that passing motions on climate change, foreign interests, and hosting these secretive meetings where they're funding gender programs should not be the role of local government. So that's a really good resource, but I encourage you to speak to your community groups, because for sure, just speak to your own networks, because everybody knows someone good who's running for council. There's a lot of them out there. Or I'll give you a card and just send me a message later, because I'm inundated with good people running for council. They're just messaging me all the time, and so I'm just, this guy's good, that guy's good, don't vote for him, he's an undercover Greens. I'm pretty across it, so I'll give you a card after. Yeah.
One of the questions I was going to say is, can we coordinate meeting with Sonia Kilkenny, who's the town planning Victorian lady of SRL? Can we sort of organise you challenging her about how she's pushing all these 40-storey buildings in High Cheltenham and put her in the limelight? Because she actually gets exemptions to push anything through she likes. I found this out through a lawyer that actually represented SRL, and that would be a great way to challenge her in her election. Yeah, so Sonia Kilkenny is the state member for Carrum. And she's also a minister, and she's on a lot of money. She's probably on, I'm going to say ballpark 400. So you'd think that somebody on such a high salary would engage with the community. I can tell you right now, I will sit down and talk to her. I'd even challenge her to a debate, but she'll never sit down with me, and she'll never address the people in this room, okay? Because the reality is,
she considers herself to be in a certain level of society. She considers us to be down here, okay? And she looks down on people like us. And that's the problem with Australian politics. They've become too big for their own shoes. That's why regular people need to challenge them as strongly as possible, because they're not fit for purpose. If she was a good representative, she would agree, but all we will receive from her is crickets.
I worked with her quite closely, so I could actually try and lure her out without her knowing who and what I am.
Like an ambush, like an intervention, like a drug addict that needs to be spoken to.
I used to run festivals with her, so
Okay.
I could actually say, hey, we've got this site for a festival, and we could put her in a position to go, oh, we're doing a sustainable festival, would you like to come along? I helped her set up the Victorian Can program for 10 cents, and that's how she got high in her ranks, through what I organised with her. So we just set her up.
So she owes you a favour then, right?
Yeah, a bit of, 1 cent a can. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, we could definitely trick her into some beautiful moves.
Well, I'll be happy to engage with her or anyone else. It's more the unwillingness is from their side, not mine. So just know that I'm down for whatever, whenever. Any other questions, thoughts, feelings?
Just a suggestion.
Suggestion? Okay.
Which may help with campaigning. I noticed at the last federal election, the Teals came in and took over Bentley. And what they did is, very cleverly, they hired a whole lot of people, put on T-shirts with their party logo, and just kept walking up and down handing out pamphlets. Now, the beauty of that is anybody who's into marketing would know about. We just got to repeat. That's what the mainstream media do. When they repeat climate change and global warming, they just keep repeating. So we can do the same thing.
George, they did door knocking.
No,
Yeah.
it's okay. I'm just saying they were very clever.
George, I have a vacancy on my campaign team. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Should George join the Freedom Party campaign team? All right, there we go. Thanks, George. There's always a danger in speaking up. I'll find a job for you. I will. Yes, madam.
How do you know where the preferences go for the voters, the council people? How do you know their preferences?
Okay, that's a good. So the question is, where do the preferences go for the council candidates? Okay, so that's determined by the elector. Okay, so it's not in the Victorian Upper House. We have automated preference allocation, which is where a lot of the trickery and the deals occur. Victoria, the last state to have the group voting ticket, but with local council, you need to number your boxes, and so the best way to make an informed decision is to know who's running, and if you're not sure, then speak to some people in the community. Speak to Wanja, sorry, and get an idea that way.
Yeah, but what I mean, I've got a friend in Essendon, and she's speaking to this young guy who's wants to go into council or already is in council, but she wants to know from him, where does his preferences go? How does she find?
Well, that'll be on his how to vote card. If he, not all candidates issue a how to vote card. I know people running for local council who they're not preferencing anyone. So the preferences on the how to vote card, it's just a suggestion from the candidate. And so every person is in charge of their own preferences. But Essendon, I know for sure around that region, there's some great people running. There's a great guy who's a former AFP, former federal police, wants to whip councils into shape. So yeah, if it's a matter of getting connected to people who are running, then I'll give you my card, send me an email, and I'll do a quick search, find out who's there, and send it back to you, and you can ask that person. I'm just a traffic controller in this. Down the back. Nigel.
My understanding is that just as success has been achieved around the world by parties working together
Yes.
in a coalescence, similarly at a federal, state, local level in Australia, there are people who are emasculated by the impact that corporates and large business have on policies generally. And so I'd like your perspective on the seeing. Is this similar? Is this what's happening?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a great point. And I think that as the years have rolled on, we've seen an enhanced level of cooperation between big corporate and big government, and sometimes the two are becoming indistinguishable. Really, when you look at companies, off the top of my head, to the likes of Qantas, and you know, Qantas and ANZ, you know, really just looking like a sort of arm of the government. And that's how Mussolini defined fascism, right? The merger of the corporatism and the state. So I hear what you're saying. I like some of the policies from the United States in terms of controlling monopolies and setting market caps for certain industries to ensure that duopolies are not able to attain a stranglehold on certain markets, which can then, of course, cooperate hand in hand with the government. And we know that they're colluding and fixing prices. So this is where I might differ a little bit from the libertarians. I'm not opposed to looking at sort of market cap controls for big industries like supermarkets, etc., to ensure that competition remains, and so that one company doesn't become so powerful that it can literally have the government eating out of the palm of its hand, which I think in the end is going to be better for Australian businesses, producers, farmers, and the end consumer. So that's, yeah, in broad terms, that's my position on that.
It's Morgan, I believe.
That's me.
I got your name wrong.
That's completely fine. It wouldn't be the first time. I'm sure it won't be the last.
There's something like 12,000 World Economic Forum corporations in Australia, and that's really quite concerning. So we need to really try and target in on them to go, why are you selling out internationally, joining a World Economic Forum? So that's something that really a lot of Australians don't actually know, and it's a great one to push through and say we need to really ask Australians why they're selling out internationally, which means they have corporate international control. Yeah, I just thought that's a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. In my view, any time where there's a misappropriation of taxpayer funding used for a cause that doesn't further the interests of the Australian people, that's just simply a means by which our money shouldn't be spent on. Okay, if you were to ask the average person in the street what do they expect their taxes to go towards, they'll say roads, hospitals, ensuring a good quality of life, hopefully paying politicians and bureaucrats who fight for good deals for Australia, who will put together immigration plans that work, that are compatible, right? Maybe grants for certain key industries that we need growth in order to be competitive on an international scale, right? They're not going to tell you, oh, we want our money to fund offshore organisations that want to teach boys to be girls and girls to be boys, and for more surveillance cameras to watch our every single move. So what it really comes down to is cracking down on the grotesque, immense misappropriation of our taxpayer money that we work for, money that is not working for us, and having a chainsaw approach like Harvey MLA, getting back to basics and serving the people. So that's my response to whether it's an organisation like you mentioned, or whether it's the Office of the Gender Equality Commissioner of Victoria. They all have to go. George.
If you, just something really important, Neil Mitchell at the last federal election
Yes.
Encouraged people to get in early and put their votes in pre-poll. And I would recommend that anybody that puts their vote into pre-poll, given the corruption, could be wasting their vote. You want to vote on the last day.
Yeah, I agree.
On the actual last day.
That's an opinion. Personally, I haven't seen anything to suggest that pre-poll votes are not counted properly or anything like that. So I know there's a range of opinions out there, but I haven't seen anything to support that personally. I'm just being honest and telling you my experience. Down the back in the blue jumper. I can hear you loud and clear.
I believe that there's quite a few councils that are subject to or member of ICLE, registered in Bonn, Germany, which is part of the UN. Are you aware of that or in common?
What?
ICLEI, ICLE.
Which councils are you referring to specifically?
I can't mention who they are, but there's over 2,500.
We don't have that many councils. If you were to give me some specific examples of what you're referring to, then I would be happy to have a read of it. A bit of bedtime reading. That would be appreciated, because I'd need some specific examples to have an opinion on it. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I guess on that, just from what Jess was saying as well, and I don't know if it's got to do with what Michael's saying, but as far as corporations, they're also being, I don't know how many of them are doing it willingly, and others are maybe being squeezed. They have what's their ESG score?
Yes.
So it's like economic, social, I can't remember what G's, but they have to show they have to show the government a score that shows that they've done certain things, so certain actions in regards to transgender that they're doing.
And climate change and that sort of thing. Yeah.
All of that kind of stuff. So that number that you mentioned, Jess, about the numbers of corporations that are aligned to the WEF could be a lot more than that, because they're all being squeezed to do these ESG scores.
Yeah, well, that's right. And these types of policies, a lot of them are cooked up in the World Economic Forum, printed, photocopied, and adopted at a state, territory, federal level, and introduced as bills in Parliament. So these are the origin of these policies and bills are not actually coming from Australia, which is the problem, and it comes down to something the World Economic Forum specifically refers to as global governance. It's not a secret. That's what they call it, and of course, what it results in is again the misappropriation of our taxpayer money that lines the pockets of people in the Australian government who sit in an air-conditioned office all day writing these policies. All right, well, what should the gender quota be for industries A, B, C, and D, and what should the carbon targets be? And these people are not producers. These people have never picked up a hammer or built this country, but they're reaping incredible salaries from our hard work. And so this is simply just, furthering the fact that we need self-governance. We need freedom. We need freedom from unelected multilateral foreign institutions who are trying to craft how we live. And we need freedom from governments who, quite frankly, steal our money and distribute it to people in their club. And we're not in that club. And that's why we have to destroy them, quite frankly. And it's been going on for so long. It has to stop. It won't be Labor, it won't be Liberal, but I guarantee you, we have 2,000 members in our party, and we all have the same view, and we're willing to fight for this country. And the tone that I've set is that you fight and you go all the way and you don't sell out. And ladies and gentlemen, that's all I have time for. I have to get to Rosanna. I got to run. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that was